Hello everyone, my name is Michael and today I want to talk about index funds. An index fund is a type of mutual fund that aims to match a specific basket of securities in a specific index. So, a security could be a stock and an index could be the S&P 500, which consists of the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the United States. Another type of index could be all of the publicly traded companies on the US market. With an index, you typically have hundreds or thousands of different securities put into a single collection or a basket. The most popular index funds out there come from Vanguard. One of the most well-known index funds is the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF with ticker VOO. As its name suggests, this is an index fund that is meant to match the performance of the S&P 500, which has an average annual return of 8%. When you invest into this index fund, it is entirely hands-off by nature. You don't have to worry about buying and selling individual stocks. The portfolio managers responsible for the index fund handle everything behind the scenes and everything's all good. Another popular index fund from Vanguard is the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF with ticker VTI. This index fund includes not only the companies in the S&P 500 index, but also all publicly traded companies in the United States. The management of the index fund is the same. You don't have to do anything behind the scenes. You can sit back and watch the value of your investment grow. But this does not come for free. And that's because it is common for index funds to have an expense ratio, which is a cost that is incurred when investing into these index funds. The expense ratio is a percentage of the total amount that is invested into the index fund, and it can range to be less than 0.1% or even as high as 1%, if not higher, depending on the fund that it is. But for those two index funds I brought up earlier, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF and the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, they actually have some of the lowest expense ratios ever for an index fund. For both of these funds, the expense ratio is currently 0.03%, meaning that if you have $10,000 invested into these funds, $3 will be deducted or priced in to cover for the fund's expense ratio, which for $10,000 is very, very small. And this is actually why a lot of people prefer to go with these two Vanguard index funds. They have a very small expense ratio, so it's not going to cost a lot to invest in these funds, and the average annual returns that are to be expected from these funds are virtually not affected by the 0.03% expense ratio. And that way, Vanguard gets their cuts, you let your investment grow, and everybody wins. But for some people, any expense ratio is too much, so they would prefer to avoid them as much as possible. This could mean investing in the individual securities themselves, but now you're playing with a much more active role with managing those assets, and that defeats the purpose of an index fund. And you're also taking on more risk with those individual securities, because chances are you won't be investing into all the securities that an index fund offers. So, is there anything you could do if you want to invest in an index fund and also pay no expense ratio? The answer is yes. You can invest in an index fund without paying an expense ratio. How do you do it? What is it? Is there any downside? That's what I want to talk about. What are the index funds that let you invest without paying an expense ratio? These funds are from Fidelity. There are 4 different zero-fee funds, and depending on your situation, they might be something you want to think about. And on top of being zero-fee index funds, they also require no minimum investment. So sometimes you might need $3,000 or a different amount to get started with investing in an index fund. This is common if you use Vanguard or Fidelity, but in this case, you don't need to. The 4 funds are tickers FNILX, FZROX, FZIPX, and FZILX. FNILX would be like your S&P 500 ETF. Think VOO, SPY, or IVE. And although the fund itself doesn't call itself an S&P 500 index fund, the holdings in this fund are large cap companies that you would typically see in an S&P 500 index fund like VOO and SPY. Think of FNILX as like a generic store brand large cap index fund with companies with market values greater than $10 billion. Fidelity does have its own version of an S&P 500 index fund, just like Vanguard, but the holdings are ever so slightly different, which means that if you compare the performance of the funds side by side, they will differ. And as of the time of me recording this, they don't differ by much. But if you are investing for the long term, those differences will not matter in the grand scheme of things. On any given day for an equal investment, FNILX might do slightly better than an S&P 500 index fund like VOO or SPY. It might do slightly worse, but the two funds should approximately mirror each other. The reason they are ever so slightly different is because Fidelity cannot copy and paste an index fund outright and simply give it a new name, whether that is with their existing index funds or their competitors like Vanguard. In fact, this index fund actually has 516 holdings and not 500. So you're not going to see the same exact composition that SPY or VOO would have because Fidelity would get sued if they did that. But the concept is the same, and I want to repeat this. If you're investing for the long term, these differences will not matter. And even with an expense ratio as low as 0.03%, you will still be saving a lot of money over the long term by going with these zero fee funds. The other three zero fee index funds offered by Fidelity are a total market index fund, an international index fund, and an extended market index fund. The total market index fund is FZROX, and this would be equivalent to VTI, which is the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. The expense ratio for this index fund is the same as VOO, so 0.03%. So for every $10,000 invested, you would have $3 deducted or priced in, which again is a very small amount. FZROX seeks to provide investment results that correspond to the total return of a broad range of US stocks. Unlike the large cap index fund, this actually differs quite a bit from its Vanguard counterpart, in that while VTI has 3,910 holdings, FZROX has 2,651, which means that the holdings will be weighted differently. With that said, having over 2,600 stocks is still a lot, but not as much as 3,900. The next zero fee index fund is an international index fund. The international index fund is FZILX, and the Vanguard counterpart would be VXUS. Unlike the expense ratios for VOO and VTI, the expense ratio for VXUS is a little bit higher, coming in at 0.08%. So for every $10,000 invested, you would have $8 deducted or priced in, which is still a very small amount for $10,000. FZILX seeks to provide investment results that correspond to the total return of foreign developed and emerging stock markets. So the vast majority of the holdings will be from companies not based in the United States. The holding disparity between FZILX and VXUS is even greater, and that's because FZILX has 2,404 holdings, while VXUS currently has 7,541, which is a big difference. The last zero fee index fund offered by Fidelity is the Extended Market Index Fund. The Extended Market Index Fund is FZIPX, and the Vanguard counterpart would be VXF. The expense ratio for VXF is also higher than the expense ratios for VOO and VTI, which is 0.06%. So for every $10,000 invested, you would have $6 deducted or priced in. FZIPX seeks to provide investment results that correspond to the total return of stocks of mid to small capitalization US companies. This would be a way to complement the large cap index fund FNILX. These mid and small cap companies would make up the stocks of the top 2,500 companies in the United States, excluding the largest 500. And that's what we see close to in the holdings for the index fund. FZIPX has 2,135 holdings, while VXF has 3,511. Different number of holdings, the objective is the same. Should you invest into these zero-fee index funds? It depends on your situation and a few other things you should know. In order to invest into these zero-fee index funds, you must use Fidelity as your broker. Unlike Vanguard index funds, which offer an ETF that you can purchase on most brokerages, these zero-fee index funds can only be purchased with Fidelity. This means that you have to make an account with Fidelity and leave your capital in there, and you cannot transfer it to another broker. So if you are fine with that, these index funds can be a good choice, but that's not the only factor you should be thinking about. Just like I mentioned earlier, although these index funds are meant to replicate the results of other, more traditional index funds, it doesn't guarantee that they do or will every year. A part of that is simply because these funds have not been around for a substantial amount of time. There's only a few years of data at most for these funds, and although the ideal result is that over time, the results of these funds average out as close to their traditional counterparts, we just don't have that long-term data. With the limited data that is available now, these funds, such as FNILX, do appear to be producing comparable results to their older counterparts. So, if you are young and haven't been investing for a while, you do have that privilege of being able to take that risk of investing into an index fund that hasn't been time tested, and along the way, enjoy an ideally 8% annualized return with no expense ratio. But if you are a bit older, chances are you have your portfolio and possibly retirement accounts already established in an index fund like VOO or SPY. You're fine with paying the expense ratio and you see no reasons to switch to anything else, and that's fine. It's fine to stick to what has worked for you over a long time, and you can keep making contributions to those index funds. At the same time, if you do decide to allocate a small percentage of your portfolio to these zero-fee index funds that you know you can't afford to lose, or know that it may not produce comparable results, then that could be a strategy as well that you could consider. That is it for this video, everyone. Let me know down below if you would invest into these zero-fee index funds, and if you don't, why would you not? I want to know. I'm curious. That is it for this video, everyone. Thank you so much for watching.